Dan, probably a great thing to start with that I know is one of the questions I get most often because a lot of the investors, they see the shenanigans on the COMEX, they see a price that doesn't make sense. They wonder if some companies can withhold production. They've heard of First Majestic doing that. And I think a lot of shareholders are now familiar with Endeavour. You guys have actually mentioned in some of your recent statements that you've withheld production from the market. So perhaps you could start there. What led to that before we dig a little bit more into the company later on?
Yeah, starting mid 2021, we start withholding some metal from the market.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Mark is here with you for Arcadia Economics on Thursday, February 3rd, 2022. Certainly an active time in the world. A lot happening in the financial markets, a lot happening politically, and in particular, today an interesting day because yesterday seems to me as if we've seen the begin of the popping of the everything bubble. You see a bunch of stocks here, mainly Facebook, which is down 26%, certainly representing a large portion of today's economy. And as I've been sitting here wondering at some point, when you see a correction there, what will happen to some of that money? Will it flow into the silver sector, which is still at the lower end of its range, although fortunately navigating through all those things. And one of the people that the world is going to be counting on to bring us silver and figure that out through a challenging company environment, Dan Dickson of Endeavour Silver, a company that many of our viewers know. And we had Brad Cook on, I believe that was last year. So a lot of people familiar with Endeavour, especially you guys have been withholding metal, a topic that is on many silver investors' minds. So anyway, with all that said, Dan, it's great to have you on in here today. Exciting day in the financial markets. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Chris. Much appreciate having us on. And it's always good to come out and give an update of what we're doing as a company and what's happening in the silver space.
Yeah, well, it sure is nice to have you here again because I think what draws a lot of silver investors to what's going on is they see, at least from a fundamental supply and demand standpoint, something seems a little off. And at least as of Thursday afternoon, we see silver around 22.40. And Dan, probably a great thing to start with that I know is one of the questions I get most often because a lot of the investors, they see the shenanigans on the COMEX, they see a price that doesn't make sense. They wonder if some companies can withhold production. They've heard of First Majestic doing that. And I think a lot of shareholders are now familiar with Endeavour. You guys have actually mentioned in some of your recent statements that you've withheld production from the market. So perhaps you could start there. What led to that before we dig a little bit more into the company later on?
Yeah, starting mid 2021, we start withholding some metal from the market. I mean, we are a business and we do need cash flow. And obviously we have supplies that need to get paid for. And so we do need cash going through our business, and we can't withhold everything from a metal standpoint. But when we see a soft market or something that we see as short-term dips in the price of silver, we'll definitely hold back and wait for the normal ebbs and flows that you see on a day-to-day basis, the volatility in our silver price. And so at the end of Q2, I think we held back almost 1 million ounces of silver and a little bit of gold, but ultimately most of that was silver. And I think it was worth about $30 million US at the time. Same thing, saw it come back a little bit in 2021 and Q3, and then again in Q4, made some sales, but then at the end of those quarters saw it dip again. And we got a great balance sheet. We have over $100 million of cash for Endeavour and probably over close to $150 million in working capital. So we have a lot of flexibility to withhold metal when we think the price isn't reflective of what it's going to be in the short term, and ultimately in the long term, we see silver prices going significantly higher than we are today. And I'd say over the last 3 to 6 months, we've seen a correction, as you say, yesterday, a big pop in Facebook and where those funds flow. And typically the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater. But when everything kind of settles down, I think people are going to come back and look at gold and silver, and ultimately from a monetary aspect, what we've been doing as governments and debasing our currencies. And eventually that's going to get reflected in the silver and gold prices. And I think with what we have coming down the pipeline for Endeavour with our pipeline, we'll be able to take advantage of that really nicely.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, how did you guys arrive at that decision? Because it's certainly something a lot of investors talk about, a lot of people in the market talk about. I'm certainly a fan of because, if I think that the silver price is going to be higher by whatever amount that is, obviously, I'd rather see the company sell at the higher price. But like you said, there's a lot of factors that go involved. Can you walk where you guys came up with the idea and how you maybe to whatever degree you decide the amount or how long you hold something for?
Yeah, there was no magic to it. We didn't sit around a boardroom and kind of get into that detail of when and when not to. It's ultimately a feel, and I've been in the space now 15 years. As you say, Brad Cook, he's still chairman of the company, comes in 1 or 2 days a week. We sit down and talk about it, and ultimately it's kind of a trader's aspect, a little bit of feel, and again, I think what works out well for us is we have flexibility on our balance sheet. We're either accumulating US dollars or we're accumulating bullion. At this point, obviously all our expenditures are in US dollars. We don't need to convert that bullion into US dollars. So we have that flexibility to do it, and we've bantered it back and forth over time. And there's history in the history of the company. We've held back metal sales, and at this time we just felt like it was appropriate based on where silver prices were that we'd hold it back. And one day we'll liquidate that and turn it into US dollars, because we are building the Terranera mine in Mexico that will need US dollars to pay for that construction.
Yeah, Dan, what is the feedback from your investors been like where, we're in a culture today where a lot of things are focused on what's happening now, short term, yet again, silver, a little bit of a unique industry, and where I think people have been wanting that. So I'm curious, what has the feedback been like so far?
We've gotten great feedback from inside the industry and outside our retail shareholder base. And even institutions that hold Endeavour have been supportive of how we've handled our balance sheet and ultimately our sales strategy. And I think when people really step back and look at it, I mean, we have 200 million ounces proven out in the ground. So sometimes the day-to-day aspects of holding back what's above ground doesn't make as much sense. But if we can make a little bit more money for our shareholders and go into that, it's obviously positive for the business and for our shareholders. And ultimately, like I say, long term, the short term gyrations in the silver price have a little bit of meaning, but not huge. We always are looking at what's silver going to do 4 or 5 years down the road and position ourselves for that. And I think we've done a really good job of building out our pipeline over the last year, with Terranera coming on, looking for a development decision there, and then recently acquired the Pitarrilla mine, or sorry, the Pitarrilla exploration project from SSR Mining about a month ago. So that's an asset that is literally considered one of the crown jewels in the silver space, and we're exceptionally excited for it.
Yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to ask, because I think something people, especially in the silver world, it's almost hard to put in perspective, but we say, all right, well, you have this much. Hey, maybe demand was up a little bit last year, but the companies, they can churn out a couple more ounces yet. It took me a couple of years, and I think a lot of people still grasping that even if you have silver hit 40, 50, 60, $70, projects will get turned on, but the amount that actually comes out and the amount of time that it takes for that metal to get to the market, I think is probably a lot less than people would think. And maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, yes and no. To be honest, I think it's a long time to get into the marketplace. Like Pitarrilla, which is 525 million ounces of resources defined in the ground. I mean, maybe not all that sees the light of day, but that was originally discovered in 2002, and ultimately feasibility studies were put on it. 2009 was the first pre-feasibility study, and a feasibility in 2012. And I think just the way governments are moving, regulations obviously increased over the last 10 years, even over the last year or 5 years. It always seems to be more red tape to get these things to market. So ultimately, when silver or any mine or any metal is discovered, I think it's a long time before it comes into market, and that's why you see these big pops in prices, because you don't have the supply to be able to support that. Now, in our side, from a silver standpoint, only about 30% of the silver that's mined annually comes from primary silver mines. So 70% is coming as a byproduct out of a copper mine or out of a gold mine, et cetera, et cetera. So those gentlemen or those mines mostly would reflect to the prices of what's happening in gold or what's happening in copper. So if silver pops, you don't have a lot of silver mines ready to come in and fill that gap of supply need to kind of balance that out. So that's why it is considered one of the most volatile metal prices out there. It's because of the ability to fill that supply gap.
Yeah, and what do you think happens at some point where we hear about all these plans to go green, a whole lot of things the government's plan to do, where they're going to get the money from, where they're going to get the silver from is usually not as well vocalized. How do you think that ultimately plays out?
It plays out with higher price silver. Like ultimately, and you kind of touched on it, there's two aspects to the silver price from a demand standpoint. The monetary aspect, where sovereign debts and what we think the governments are doing to debase the currency, and that's often reflected in gold. What silver is different is the greenification, the electrification of the world, and gold's got the monetary aspect. Silver's got the monetary aspect, and it's got the industrial component of electrification and greenification. And just as an example, your vehicles now, on an annualized basis, we use about 60 million ounces of silver in vehicles, the combustion engine. As we move into electric vehicles, that triples. So it goes from 60 million ounces to 180 million ounces. If you look at the historical supply chain on an annualized basis, we're producing about 800 million ounces a year. It peaked at 1 billion. So you're chewing up just on metals. It used to be less than 10%. It's going to be almost 20% of our usage of silver in EV vehicles, which they're talking still that it's going to explode 2025, 2030. So you've got a pull from a monetary aspect, you've got a push from an industrial aspect that just suggests silver is going to be significantly higher from where it is today. So again, it's shaping up to be a wonderful spot, and we put our company in the position with Terranera, with our Perel exploration project, with acquiring Pizzeria, to fully take advantage of that when silver does pop.
Yes, and I would like to dig into that a little more specifically in a moment. Although one question about what you mentioned, everything you said makes sense to me. I wonder sometimes the industrial users, like an Apple, like a Samsung, I am guessing someone in some of these companies saw what happened last year on Silver Squeeze. I'm sure that,
Yep.
we talk often about the fragile silver supply chain that I'm guessing didn't get any less fragile now that truckers are parked all over Canada. So it doesn't seem like it got easier to move things. So I wonder what the industrial user, the guy who's sitting there, whoever's role that is at an electronics company, and obviously don't reveal anything that's confidential, but has that ever come up in conversations? I've heard of some silver companies mention that they have heard directly from industrial users. Anything that you've heard or can share there?
Yeah, I mean, CFO, I used to hear from industrial guys often. I think part of the disconnect is that transportation costs, and often people will look to the COMEX and see a quota price and want to pay either that price or a little bit of discount because they think they're coming in and they're acquiring a volume of silver, which ultimately we can sell onto the exchange and get that price. I think the biggest thing for us is as we refine our metal, we get our London account credited. So whether we produce that metal and what shows up in London, they're probably not the exact same bar. So there's no transportation costs to us. So often when the industrial guys come and ask, they want to buy X amount of tons and kind of lock that in, it makes it difficult for us to jump into that agreement because now we're arguing about who's taking that transportation cost. And if I don't need to take it, they need to take it. So it's always been difficult to kind of settle on kind of having an end user come in and buy our metal. But nonetheless, you're seeing it now in other metal spaces where end users, i.e. Tesla's trying to secure assets for themselves for the long-term future. And I haven't seen that happen in our space yet. Not say it's not going to, but you never know.
Yeah. Well, it's just fascinating. It's one of those things where after it unravels, people say, hey, how could nobody have seen this yet? There are plenty of people who are studying, watching, seeing what is eventually going to happen. And I think that's one of the things that's nice, that on a company level, you guys have been doing what a lot of investors attempt to do with their portfolio, in terms of, hey, we can't control the price, but we can control how we respond to it. And obviously, you guys have been pretty busy in the last couple of months. So essentially picking up larger scale additions to your portfolio while the prices are lower. And perhaps you could walk folks through some of the deals that you guys have been working on.
Yeah, it's been an exciting year. I don't know. I know my predecessor, Brad Cook, spent some time with you, Chris, and has joined your show. And ultimately, it's my first time. I moved from our CFO role into the CEO role in May of 2021. So I've been in the seat for almost a year. Right before Brad took over, we'd cut a deal, or sorry, I took over from Brad. We cut a deal to pick up a gold asset in Nevada. It's called the Bruner Project. It's in the Walker Lane. We're excited about it. It had a fine resource of about 300,000 ounces of gold and 13 million ounces of silver. We're going to redefine that under 43-101 guidelines. Expect that to have kind of available in 2022 or the end of this year. And we saw that as opportunistic, to be honest. We came across it. We liked the project. Ultimately, the company that had it was a junior exploration company that, God bless them, they're able to put debt on their books. But for a company that put debt on your books without an ability to service that debt with revenue, it makes it very difficult. So they got in a position where they were stuck. And we were able to pick up Bruner for $10 million. When you look at from an accretive standpoint of what other assets in Nevada with those many ounces that were defined, we saw an ability to, I shouldn't say steal the asset, but ultimately get it for a very good price. So we're excited about that. We're going to push that forward in 2022. We also in the last a month or so here, and we announced it in January of 2022, is the acquisition of the Pitarrilla exploration project from SSR Mining. And Pitarrilla, like I said earlier, is a crown jewel in our silver space. It's got 525 million ounces defined, plus lead and zinc. So it's a massive project. There was a feasibility study done on it in 2012 with great economics. It looked at a super pit. What we're going to look at is what we know is underground mining. So we're going to define that resource, redefine that, put it into a current resource of under 43-101, which is Canadian regulations, so we can speak to it, and ultimately look at an underground operation, what we do at Guanaceví, what we do at Bolañitos, what we're going to build at Terronera to bring that on. And again, if you look in the silver space of all the primary silver producers, a lot of them have picked up gold assets or base metal assets. Endeavour, we're a silver company and a gold company. We have 60% of our revenue comes from gold, 40% comes from silver. So picking up something like Pitarrilla really keeps us down that silver lane for the long term. And to combine that with Terronera that we're going to have hopefully built over the next 2 years, Pitarrilla slots in extremely well behind that. Like I said earlier, we also have the Parral project. We keep on putting good results out there. That's almost about 90% silver as from a deposit standpoint. We've defined 40 million ounces, continue to grow. We're trying to grow it to 60, 65 million ounces. So we're just looking at how do we make the company look or set up extremely well for that increase in silver price with silver assets and maintain that silver dominance in our revenue stream as we go forward. And we're excited about Pitarrilla. Like I say, there's not many assets in the world like Pitarrilla. It's one of the largest undeveloped silver deposits in the world, and now it's in our hands, and we get to kind of advance that forward, and hopefully will one day be a mine for us.
Yeah, it's interesting what you mentioned about the projects, and also you touched on earlier having a good financial position where when the price is low, not being the one who's worried about going out of business, but being in position while others are panicking, especially that's at least as a former option trader or current option trader. When I see, all right, if I have an idea of the value and these guys are panicking and you're getting the lower price. So just interesting how here's a situation where doing that right really gives you a lot of options that a cash trap company might not have. And anything else you could add on that?
Yeah, I think you've hit on it. I mean, people always get concerned if you're in the trough, and for, like I say, silver is one of the most volatile metals out there, and there's troughs and there's peaks, and peaks people see and people talk about and like how well they're doing, but it's the troughs where you really make the money, and you take advantage of the troughs when you can, and ultimately picking up assets at low prices, knowing that they're low prices or feeling that they're low prices, and ultimately riding that up to those peaks and high prices. That's when the real wealth is generated. And I'd say about 15, 20 years early in my career, you'd kind of be not depressed, but down because, hey, things aren't going your way. Now I see it as nothing but opportunity and going, oh my God, prices are down. This is the time we can pounce. And when you can shift that mindset and that focus to going, this is a great time, and understand why it's a great time, it makes it a lot more fun and ultimately able to get things done and going, look, I'm not looking at Endeavour Silver the next 1, 2, 3 years. Where's Endeavour sit in 8, 9, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? And if you can think in those terms, it makes it a lot easier not to worry about the day-to-day struggles and stress, which is always there, but going, okay, we're set up to take advantage of everything. And I mean, like I say, it's a mindset. And once you get over that historical short-term thought and get into the long-term, it makes it a lot easier to run the business. That's for sure.
I would certainly imagine. I really appreciate you mentioning that, because whether it's on the investor side, running a company, being in a family, there's the things that we can control, the things that we can't. And I guess it's something I've noticed as I've studied people who are successful in different areas of life. Maybe everybody on, when things are perfect, you're in a good mood and it all goes your way. We have that, on our best day, can do easier to do well. But I wonder if sometimes the people who excel at any craft in life, is it more that, the day where you're not feeling that great, you're able to show up and still give the best you have? And I think that's been reflected in the silver industry, where now a 10-year bear market, anyone who was, just in there because they thought it was a hot market, likely been cleaned out. And it's really people that have figured out, like you said, adjusting, all right, market's tighter. How do we bring cost in? How do we adjust our balance sheet? And the ones that have survived through that and actually left themselves in a position to be able to take advantage of the circumstances out there. So certainly seems like you've been able to pull that off.
Yeah, there's data. You always, as a business leader, you're looking long term, but there's the day-to-day stuff that you still have to manage. If silver price drops to $15 tomorrow, we have to make adjustments. If we don't make that adjustment, we're not going to be there for the tomorrow, right? And there's always stress day to day, and what you do when the lights are off, so to speak, is what ends up happening. People see kind of always the end product, but all the work's not what's out front, not coming out to these interviews. All the work is done when, like I say, the cameras are off. And if you're not willing to put that grind in, generally you're not going to have that success. And everybody's different and everybody's situations are different, but generally the people that put in the work seem to benefit from it, right? And there's an aspect of both. Always, it's a balance, and you got to set yourself up best as you can.
Well, Dan, if only we could have you running some of the governments around the world in addition to the silver company. I mean, it seems logical and sensible to me, although unfortunately in today's culture, not always quite so common. But perhaps before we wrap up, again, I think that it's starting to sink into people's minds that what the governments and Wall Street is telling us about, hey, everything's fine as long as we print new cash. The market is growing and the economy is great. I think that's really going to start to change now. And I think we'll be looking back at days like this where we see some of these tech stocks that have almost become the economy down 26%. So I know there's a lot of shock out there today. But just any final thoughts, whether about the market or, and again, we'll get the address for the site, but just anything you'd like to leave folks with today that from your experience you think could be helpful for them?
Yeah, I mean, when you say thoughts for today, I always tell people don't worry about the one day. It ultimately comes down to, you want to look at trends and get along with trends and try to look that forward thinking, and don't worry about the day-to-day volatility stuff. Believe in your thesis and stick with it. And sometimes it ends up being longer than it is or that you expect, but eventually maybe it'll come to fruition. And as you say, I think governments and the decisions they make, especially about debasing our currency and ultimately always getting bigger and always needing a bigger piece of the pie and taking more revenues through tax dollars, it makes sense that you got to protect yourself from, and having gold or silver in your portfolio is nice for a store of value. And it's always interesting times. You read articles back from the 70s or 80s. There's always things in the press that you're going, oh, that's interesting. We've never seen this, unprecedented. And here we are 30 years later, and you got very similar topics. It's just different names under that topic. So, or different names under the same headline. So it's the ebbs and flows and looking at things longer term rather than the short term day-to-day volatilities.
Yeah, I certainly agree. It's funny as you mentioned that, going back to the 70s and the 80s, because I've posted a clip of Warren Buffett before. I think it was from his 1998 shareholder meeting when it was the second time that he made a big investment into silver. And, if you listen to why he did it, you'll notice a lot of those reasons are still in existence today. And they're why I'm doing a channel about silver. And I think a lot of the reasons you just described, you're running a silver company. So certainly an industry where if you like researching history and understanding a lot of what hasn't been told, maybe I'm a little biased, but I think there's some opportunity there. And Dan, I just appreciate that you're one of the good people out there that is navigating this environment, doing it in an honest way with integrity, something that is very much needed in the financial markets, and going to be exciting to see how this unfolds going forward. I think you're going to be rewarded quite handsomely myself, although for anyone that has questions, can you give the website one more time, and what's the best way for folks to reach you and find out more information?
Yeah, the best way to reach us is through our website, which is edrsilver.com. So E is in Edward, D is in Daniel, R is in Robert, edrsilver.com. We have a spot there where you can post questions, and generally we'll get back to you in relatively short order. So thanks for having me on, Chris. Much appreciated, and hope to do it again.
Well, thank you, Dan. Really appreciate what you're doing, and not the easiest environment, but so different from what I experienced on Wall Street, where it's the opposite, where there's people in the silver industry, whichever role they're in, have a common theme, and it's nice to be part of a team. And we'll be looking forward to following your success, and anything we can do to help, please let us know, because there's a lot of good people out there that do love silver and support what you're doing. And just a pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you. Thank you.